Hey everybody, good morning or whatever time it is when you're watching this. I know today you're getting into some reading about things like food chains and food webs. Our lesson title is How Does Energy Move Through Ecosystems? So we're talking about a flow or a movement of energy here, and this has to do with food. Things need to eat to be able to survive, animals especially, and we're going to talk about plants and the special role they play as well. I think from what you're reading today, it's not too much difficult stuff as far as grasping, but there are a couple things I want to point out, little details that are usually pretty helpful, and usually I have a chance to go over those with you in class. So I wanted to make a quick video, hopefully it's quick, to show you a few things. So I'm going to start by looking at a couple pages in the book, and then we're going to do a couple extra examples too, just to walk through this stuff. First pages you're reading are about food chains, and then we actually see a food chain here that involves this nice scene, looks like a little desert scene with some mountains in the background. A couple of things I want to point out here. First big one is all food chains, or well, most food chains, especially the ones that take place on land, I would say 99% of food chains are going to start with energy from the sun. So last week you read about producers, so plants that use that cool process called photosynthesis, where they take energy from the sun. That's like the fuel they need, like solar power and things like that. That we'll talk about when we talk about energy a little bit closer down the road. Lots of energy from the sun. It gives us light. It gives us heat. It allows plants to do that process called photosynthesis. So I like how in this picture it's kind of like the sun's up here. And notice that first arrow goes to this stuff called reindeer moss, which doesn't look like much of a plant, but in this sort of tundra ecosystem, I suppose you can say it is. So what we've got is, again, this arrow going from the sunlight to the plant that gives the plant energy and allows the plant to do that cool thing called photosynthesis. The other thing I really want to point out and emphasize, you're going to hear me say it a lot today, because again, usually I have a chance in class to really make sure we point out, because it's an easy thing to make a mistake on. This arrow goes from the sun to the plant because the energy from the sun goes to the plant, or to this moss in this case, okay? So these arrows are going to show the flow of energy in the ecosystem, all right? So usually it's easy to do when you first start out is if you see these guys, you're going to say, okay, here's a wolf and he eats the caribou. So I'm going to draw an arrow to point at the thing that it eats. But that's actually the opposite way we want it to go. What we need to think of is that the energy goes from the reindeer or the caribou to the wolf in this case, okay? And the same thing with the plant and so on. So when we go from a food chain, we go from the sun to producers to the consumers and then to any other ones. And the energy goes from that thing that gets eaten into the thing that eats it. Okay, so again, when you eat your lunch today, you're going to eat that whatever it might be, peanut butter sandwich. That energy goes from the food you eat to you. So we want to show those arrows going to the things that are getting the energy. Okay, we're not going to point at like I like this, I like that. We're going to point at the energy goes from one to the other. Okay, so again, flow of energy. These arrows are showing the flow of energy. That's a big thing to keep in mind. Okay, you're gonna hear me say it a lot here today. So the arrows show that flow of energy. So as you notice, this one we've got the arrows going from the sunlight energy, which again the plant makes it happen with photosynthesis, allows it to grow and have energy. And then there's energy stored in the plant that the reindeer or the caribou can eat. And then as it grows and does its caribou things, maybe sometimes it would get eaten by a wolf. And again, the energy goes from the caribou to the wolf. So again, notice that arrow is showing where the energy goes. And again, big thing, always starts with the sun, and that energy goes through the ecosystem. So again, this whole lesson is about how energy moves through ecosystems. It gets stored up in the plant gets eaten by the caribou, gets stored up in the caribou, like in its muscles and things. And then if it gets eaten by a wolf, it goes to the wolf. And then over here we see the decomposers. Now, we'll talk about food webs and food chains with how decomposers play a role. And here it's not it's kind of hard to really represent in an easy diagram, but it's not only the wolf that once the wolf dies, that the decomposers or scavengers would kind of recycle that energy. But any of these things could happen, right? So any matter that dies along the way gets broken down. If you watch the Rot Squad video from Magic School Bus last week, you saw a little bit of that. Dead matter from plants, dead matter from animals, poop from animals gets broken down, and there's energy in there. And there's, again, these decomposers are usually pretty yucky kind of things doing a yucky job, but it's a necessary job for the ecosystem. Okay, so big deal here. those arrows go in the direction of where the energy goes. We're not going to point to what eats what. We're pointing from where the energy goes on to the next step in the ecosystem. Okay. Then the next part or the next pages were these food webs. Okay. Food webs actually kind of tell a more accurate story of what happens in an ecosystem. A food chain, if I go back to there, is called a chain because it's like one spot to the next. It's like a straight line, okay? But in reality, a lot of times, like a caribou might eat a lot of different kind of plants, or a wolf might hunt lots of different animals. And a food web gets to be a little more accurate as far as kind of telling the whole story. So in this case, what we can actually do is find food webs within, find food chains within each food web. Any arrows we draw, any straight connections we can make is going to be like one example of a food chain, and it all kind of ties together into a web, and you can kind of get the idea why they call these food webs. There's lots going on, kind of like the parts of a spider web that kind of crisscross and all that. So it's not like a chain is just one straight line. A food web is kind of intertwined and has a lot of different things going on. So one thing we can do with food webs is identify different food chains within those food webs. Okay, so if we actually just go from one place to the next, again, notice here the energy is going. It looks like our only plant involved here is a pine tree and maybe the seeds of the pine cone. They get eaten, but notice again the energy goes here. Now, one thing they don't have in here is the sun, but keep in mind, of course, the plants are able to grow due to the sunlight energy. One thing we can look through and see is if we actually go from one place to the next, we can find a bunch of different food chains here. Okay, so I'm going to kind of do a quick little thing with that. If I start with the pine tree, we see it looks like the only thing eating it here is this insect, this pine borer insect. So we can have a line going here. And then also we see it go on to this bird called a kinglet, and we can connect there. And then looks like the kinglet could get eaten by the red-tailed hawk, so we can connect there. So this would be one food chain, okay? Now again, a food web shows a lot of different food chains. So we could also have a situation, I'm going to switch to like a dark blue color. We could have the pine cone gets eaten by the pine borer insect, and then we see another arrow going down here to the salamander, and then the salamander can get eaten by the snake, and then that snake can get eaten by the red-tailed hawk. Okay, so there we have a lot of different things going on. So here's again, red is one food chain, blue is another. Actually, I see that just changed colors on me. Oh, I didn't want to do that. All right, this was supposed to be red. Oh, and now as I look at my food web a little closer, I do see another organism in here that's a plant. So if we see these acorns over here, let's talk about that too. So there are a couple plants involved. Let's see if we let's go green. We have acorns here. We could have an acorn here. So again, this is all a food web. And if I do a food chain, I can see, okay, here we have acorns connected to the mouse. The mouse might get eaten by, well, we could have a couple things. The mouse could get eaten by the hawk. There's a food chain there. We could also have, let's do purple, that's fun. The acorn gets eaten by the mouse then gets eaten by the snake, and the snake could then get eaten by the hawk. So notice we see a couple of things here. These top predators like red-tailed hawk are ones that can eat lots of things and nothing else is eating it. So there's a few things going on. So notice here all these different connections I made are individual food chains within the food web. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple other examples I kind of made for myself here. Within this one, here's another simple food web we might see kind of in our neck of the woods, maybe in the forests and things around our area or different parts of the country. We see some basic things. So let's notice again a few things. We could talk about a real simple food chain if we look just right here. At this section here, we have a plants that get eaten by chipmunks, and then a fox could eat the chipmunk, right? And so there's, again, one food chain right here. Maybe mark that in red. Straight through, okay. We could have another food chain, like, let's see, we have maybe the plants get eaten by the butterfly, nectar, right? So this kind of represents all plants, it looks like. And then the butterfly could get eaten by the frog, and then the frog could get eaten by this eagle guy, okay? Or another one, we could even follow the same path to begin. The plants get eaten by the butterfly gets eaten by the frog, and then if we see another connection here, we have the frog eaten by the snake, and then the snake eaten by the eagle. And there's a few other ones too I haven't even touched on. So here we have this bird that could get eaten by the fox or the eagle, and we see some of the things that it could eat. So again, food webs give us a lot of detail, but in any individual connections we can make in a straight line, would make it its individual food webs as well. Okay, let's have a little fun with one. Here's one. I found that a few pictures, and this one maybe this is obviously Miss Cullen. I found this on the GA website, and look at that young fellow, just full of life and energy and just ready to attack the world. I was surprised that that's still the picture they have up for me, but you guys probably don't even know what I look like without a beard. But that's it. Okay, so there's young Mr. McComb, just a kid fresh out of school and ready to go and teach all the kids all the things. So I'm going to do a food web here, kind of like one we might see again. This is kind of a silly one. You guys know I have my Taco Tuesday socks. We could have tacos, of course. Big thing I want to show is when we're doing this, we're showing the flow of energy. Okay, so the tacos go to Mr. McComb. Miss Cullen, of course, would love tacos because everybody loves tacos. Sorry, fix that here. So we have arrows here. Now, not everything could be connected, but maybe we both like carrots. We could eat the carrots. Again, Miss Cullen are consumers. Then the tomato. I'm going to say this. I'm going to put the tomato here for Miss Cullen, but I'm not a big fan of tomatoes, so I don't want to connect that. But again, we're showing that flow of energy, where that energy is going. Now, typically, we are the ones where that food chain would end. But if we were in a certain setting, it might be a little different. So if we go up to this a little bit, and all of a sudden, oh no, we're in Jurassic Park. That's a problem because now we are kind of in the middle of the food chain, which is not where you want to be because that means you might get eaten. So if we're going and going, maybe the T-Rex could chase me down and get me, and maybe Miss Cullen too, right? And so again, notice I'm just doing this to be fun, but we're seeing the interlocking food webs here and how we take those food chains and put them all together into the food web. So this is the Dilophosaurus, bad news for me. T-Rex, bad news for me and Mrs. Cullen. That's kind of how we can look at that. Okay, again, this is just kind of meant to be a fun example. But if we zoom out a little bit, we can kind of see again. Notice the flow of energy. When I draw these arrows, I'm going from the food to where it goes. Okay, I'm not going to say Mr. McComb likes to. We're not going to say Mr. McComb likes tacos, so I'm pointing to what I like to eat. We're not going to do that. Okay, we want to keep it at the places where the energy goes. So the energy goes from the tacos to Mr. McComb. The energy goes from the tomato to Miss Cullen. And unfortunately, in this case, the energy that's stored in Mr. McComb's body goes up to the T-Rex if I'm not fast enough. Okay, so again, keep that in mind. That flow of energy is what we're representing here. All right, let's go to one that's more in reality and one that's a little more fitted for science and what we're working on here. This is the same one, similar thing. Here we don't have any arrows drawn. I'm just going to kind of go through these real quick here, but we can connect any food chains and talk about that, and we can also make it a food web. So here we have a desert. We have some plants down here, some animals here, and some predator animals up top. We could make lots of connections, right? So I might do a few different colors here with the few minutes I have left. We could have the plant gets eaten by the rabbit could get eaten by the fox, and there's a simple food chain. If I switch a color, we could have the same thing to start. We could maybe say, okay, the plant gets eaten by the rabbit, but then maybe the rabbit gets eaten by the snake, and then the snake could get eaten by the hawk. Or, again, focusing in on the rabbit, maybe the rabbit eats the plant again, and then we could also have maybe just go straight to the hawk. It could eat that, okay? Getting to some other ones, we could have, now in some cases, we don't have a whole lot of predators, and it's kind of, we don't have to connect everything to everything else, but there might be a case like this, like maybe this tortoise doesn't really have any predators. They're pretty protected by a shell, and a lot of times these predators might be looking more for like, for the rabbits that are a little easier to eat once you catch them. So the tortoise has some protections and things like that. We could also have, let me see if I can find another color. Maybe here the cactus little bits, flowers and things get eaten by the mouse, and then that mouse could get eaten by the hawk, or they could get eaten by the snake, and things like that. Or we could have even small ones with our insect friends, okay? So maybe the plants here get eaten by the grasshopper, and the grasshopper gets eaten by the scorpion and things like this. So there's lots of connections here. So again, notice here this food web is all these different colors represent different food chains, and that's kind of our big takeaway today. Okay, so as you go through, we're going to talk more. I got a few videos coming up this week. Hopefully this one was helpful, and that is going to be that. So we're going to talk about a few things moving forward with flowing of energy. Again, big thing, make sure you got these arrows going where the energy goes to, okay? Energy goes from, okay, also remember starting with the sun, the plants grow, and then the energy goes to the consumers and then on to the other consumers, okay? So keep that in mind. Hope you guys are having a great day. I'm going to go ahead and stop my video now, and you can watch the next one tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed. Hope this was helpful. Thanks, everybody.